Why was it that she always felt invisible in a room full of SEALs? It wasn't because Grace Harlow was timid. She wasn't. It wasn't because she lacked rank or presence. She carried the gold bar of a Navy lieutenant, after all. But in the small, dimly lit medbay at Camp Palman, Djibouti, silence had become her habit. Words were cheap out here. Listening, on the other hand, often kept people alive. Her gloved hands moved with steady precision, slick with someone else's blood. A corporal lay stretched out on the cot in front of her, jaw clenched, eyes locked on the ceiling. The gash in his thigh ran deep, jagged from shrapnel. Grace threaded the curved needle through his torn flesh with quiet focus. Each pull of suture thread was practiced, almost musical. She didn't flinch at the smell of iron, didn't blink at the heat radiating off the wound. Her world narrowed to the rhythm of hands that would not shake behind her. Two operators argued over tactics. Their voices were sharp, ricocheting against the steel walls of the bay. North Wall breach makes the most sense less exposed. You'd bottleneck us. East side's open. We move fast. We're in and out. Grace didn't look up. She'd heard these debates 100 times. They'd brag, joke, posture, argue about who carried more weight in the stack. It was the brotherhood she'd been attached to for months now. Adrenaline forged it. Chaos defined it. They bled for each other. But she patched the bleeding. She wasn't one of the boys. She wasn't supposed to be. They called her Doc. Just Doc. Her file called her Lieutenant Grace R.O. Harlow. Trauma specialist, second deployment. The SEALs she served beside never. Asked about the scar on her shoulder from Kandahar. She never told them. It was hers. Not her story to share. What mattered was that when rounds cracked the air and men dropped, her hands held steady. She didn't count kills. Didn't chase. Call signs. She carried morphine, gauze, plasma bags, and grit. So, when Commander Cole Maddox stepped into the briefing room that morning, Grace did what she always did. She listened. The commander's face carried that unreadable stillness she had come to recognize. His jaw was set, eyes sharp, his whole presence leaned forward as if daring the room to falter. The chatter died instantly. "We've got a live one," Maddox said. No preamble, no easing in. CIA asset, American, captured near the Somali border. Intel says he's alive, hostage. The room stilled. Even the air felt heavier. Grace's hands froze above her notepad. Hostage extractions were never clean, never simple, and when Maddox used the word asset, it meant stakes higher than just a rescue. The group holding him calls themselves Rama. Maddox continued. Small-time warlords, 2 structures. Intel says 5 hostiles, maybe 6. This is a snatch and go. Grace leaned back slightly. Her chest felt tight. 5 hostiles, maybe 6. She had heard those numbers before. They never stayed small. Beside her, Petty Officer Webb snorted. Always 5 hostiles, always in and out. Then next thing we're knee-deep in RPGs. No. One laughed. Maddox's gaze flicked toward Webb, then toward Grace. This one's hot, but contained. You're coming with us, Lieutenant. Rear support only. Stay out of the way unless things go sideways. Radio calls if you need hands-on. Grace's chin dipped. Understood. The matter settled. The team moved on. She didn't miss the way. No one questioned her inclusion. She'd been with Griffin team before. She had never drawn a weapon in anger. But they knew her place. After the bullets stopped, or even while they were still flying, she kept people breathing, still. Something about Maddox's face lingered in her mind. Not fear. Not exactly. Resignation. A man who had already made peace with whatever came next. Later, as the team staged at the perimeter wall, the mood was heavier than usual. No joking, no ribbing. Just the quiet rhythm of men checking magazines, adjusting plates, tugging straps. Even Webb, normally quick with a sarcastic remark, moved in silence. Grace packed her trauma bag methodically. Morphine auto-injectors, plasma bags, 4 lines, tourniquets, extra gauze. Every ounce mattered. Every tool placed with intention. Her hand brushed the sidearm holstered at her hip. She hated it. The weight. The meaning. She was a healer, not a killer. But combat didn't care what you believed in. Maddox appeared at her side, voice low, almost gentle. You're not here to fight. Don't let the chaos pull you in. If we take contact, you stay behind cover, copy? Grace met his eyes. She'd seen him throw himself across a wounded man in an airstrike. He wasn't giving orders to protect his mission. He was trying to protect her. Copy that, sir. He nodded and moved on. Still, she couldn't shake the edge in his voice. Something was waiting for them, just past the horizon. The sun climbed over the desert as they lifted off in the Black Hawk. Grace strapped in near the door, medpack across her chest, boots planted firm. The engines thundered, dust whipping up. From the landing zone until the world blurred into tan haze, she stared out across endless sand. How many had disappeared into that silence, never to return? She wasn't supposed to be this far forward, not on something this unstable, but she had never said no to a mission. 30 minutes in the air was all it took to cross into chaos. The tension in the bird thickened as if it could be tasted. Webb muttered a quiet prayer under his breath. Maddox checked his rifle again, though Grace knew he didn't need to. She stared down at her own hands, surprised to find the faintest tremble. Not fear, anticipation. 2 minutes out, the pilot called. Grace stood, clipped into the door. Harness, the desert air tore at her face as they descended. Her heart hammered, steady but loud. She didn't take up much space. She liked it that way. She let her presence be felt only when it counted. The last one noticed, until everything went wrong. The Black Hawk touched down in a storm of sand and sound. Boots hit dirt in unison. The seals flowed into formation like water, shadows against. The ruined horizon. Grace crouched low, trailing them, eyes sweeping the cracked walls of the compound ahead. 2 buildings, weather-beaten, a satellite dish hanging loose. Maddox gave the signal. The team split, stacking against the north wall. Grace moved behind cover, dropping low. She could hear distant voices. The heat pressed down like a hand on her neck. Everything was too quiet. And then, a single shot. Then 2. The world exploded. Automatic fire ripped from the east building, hammering the wall where the entry team had stacked. It wasn't wild spray. It was disciplined. Suppressive fire. Too sharp. Too practiced. Grace hit the dirt without thought. Bullets cracked overhead, biting into mud brick and sand like hornets. Shouts cut through the dust. Contact east. Rooftop shooters. Her stomach dropped. This wasn't 5 hostiles. This wasn't a ragtag militia. This was coordinated. Professional. She crawled behind a pile of rubble, heart pounding, trauma bag thudding against her back. Her mic clicked. Griffin 1. This is Doc, with Bravo behind north wall, taking fire. No injuries yet. Maddox's voice came back calm. Steady. Copy. Hold position. Keep your head down. We're pushing through. She pressed her forehead against the dirt. Pushing through. Meant blood. It meant screams. It meant her world was about to open. Another burst rattled the air. Then a concussive blast. Grenade. The wall shook. Shrapnel sprayed. Dust blinded her for a moment. Instinct screamed at her to move toward the sound. Her training screamed louder. Stay put. Stick to the job. But war doesn't respect boundaries. Grenade. Move. Someone shouted. Grace bit down hard, tasting iron, her hands clutching the strap of her bag. Already, she knew. This was not the mission they had been promised. It was something else entirely. Something had gone very wrong, and it was only beginning. Why did no one look at her when the first shots cracked the night? Grace crouched behind the shattered wall, dust choking her throat, heartbeat hammering loud enough to drown out her own breath. The seals moved like liquid shadows, rifles flashing. In precise bursts, every motion smooth and practiced. She was supposed to be invisible here, a medic, a shadow behind shadows. But invisibility didn't feel like safety anymore. "Doc, stay low." Webb barked, his hand slicing the air. She nodded, though he didn't bother looking back. Her fingers brushed the medpack against her hip. The weight was familiar, almost comforting. Bandages, gauze. 4 lines, her weapons. She wanted to believe that was enough. That saving lives in the aftermath was what she was here for. But the firefight didn't wait for aftermaths. Screams cut through the gunfire. A sharp cry. Rook's voice. She darted forward before thinking, sliding against the dirt to where he was half collapsed behind a chunk of wall, blood streaking his temple. "Stay still," she hissed, gloves already slick as she pressed a dressing to his wound. "Just a graze," he muttered, trying to push her hand away. "Doc, get back." "I'll decide if it's just a graze." She cinched the bandage, ignoring the burn in her knees from sliding across stone. His pulse thudded steady under her fingertips, alive, for now, above them. Tracers lit the sky, grenades cracked, sending tremors through her chest. Grace felt the ground shudder with each blast. And with it, her doubt. She wasn't like them, trained for chaos, bred for it. She was here to clean up their aftermath. But something in her bones whispered, aftermath wouldn't wait. She dragged Rook further into cover, then lifted her eyes. Across the compound, Maddox was directing the team, voice cutting through coms like steel, calm, unshakable, until the crack, the shift, his grunt as he stumbled, one hand pressed hard to his side. Grace's world tunneled. She saw the spray of red through the darkness, the way his body tilted, still fighting to stay upright. "Commander down!" Someone shouted. Her body moved before her mind did. She sprinted, bullets snapping the air, dust kicking into her face. She threw herself down beside him, hands already digging into her kit. "Stay with me," she muttered, voice trembling as she pressed gauze into the wound. Blood surged hot and fast, staining her gloves instantly. Too much, too fast. Maddox's jaw clenched, his teeth bared against the pain. "Keep pressure," he ground out. "I know," she snapped, though her throat burned. The firefight raged around them, shadows darting, gunfire pounding. Grace bent lower, shielding him with her own body as she worked. Tourniquet, gauze, 4-line. Her hands shook but didn't stop. She couldn't stop. "You're not dying on me," she whispered, though she didn't know if it was to reassure him or herself. A round slammed into the wall above her, showering them with stone chips. She flinched, her body curling instinctively over him. He was slipping, his breathing ragged, his lips pale. Then, his hand shifted, weak, trembling. He pushed at his rifle, sliding it toward her. Her eyes darted to it. The Barrett, massive and heavy, lying between them. Her throat went dry. "No," she muttered. "I'm not here for that. I'm here for you." But his eyes burned into hers, sharp even through the haze. He didn't have to speak. The message was clear. Take it. Grace froze, the world roaring around her. Her heart slammed against her ribs, torn between the oath she had lived by and the reality pressing down on her. Save lives, heal wounds. That was her calling. But saving him, saving all of them, might mean breaking it. Her hands hovered, one pressed tight against his wound, the other trembling inches above the Barrett's grip. Gunfire cracked again. Closer now. Shouts echoed through the compound. She heard Webb's voice, strained, urgent. "We're getting overrun. Where's our cover?" Grace closed her eyes for a single breathless second, then opened them. Her hand curled around the Barrett. The steel was colder than she expected, heavy as a verdict. And, in that moment, Grace Harlow stopped being invisible. What startled her most wasn't the recoil. It was the silence that followed it. After 3 violent cracks of the Barrett, the compound seemed to pause, not quiet. Gunfire still barked. Grenades still echoed, But something had shifted. The rhythm had faltered. The enemy, for the first time, seemed unsure. Grace exhaled hard, dust filling her lungs. Her shoulders screamed from the rifle's kick. But she pushed the pain aside. Pain was nothing new. She peered back through the scope. Across the courtyard, the technical sat abandoned, its guns silent, its gunner sprawled. The SEALs used the brake, pushing through the breach, movements sharp and coordinated. Maddox's voice cracked through the radio. Hostage location confirmed. Move now. Grace dragged the Barrett across rubble, repositioning. Her hands trembled, not with fear, but with the stubborn weight of adrenaline that had nowhere else to go. She wasn't supposed to be doing this. She wasn't supposed to be behind a rifle, but the battlefield doesn't ask permission. Her scope swept the rooftops. A flicker of movement, a rifle barrel. She squeezed the trigger. Another body dropped. 4. Her throat tightened. She didn't count saves like this. She counted pulses, breaths, the ones she dragged back from the edge. But now? She was pulling her team back from the edge, one trigger pull at a time. Doc. Webb's voice crackled through. Keep them off us. We're inside. She didn't answer. She couldn't. She was already shifting, breath sinking with her sight line. Her mind split into 2 tracks. One part still the medic, cataloging injuries, triaging risks. The other part, the reluctant marksman, calculating angles, watching for flashes of metal. A rooftop fighter leaned out too far, firing a PKM. Grace fired. He fell back into dust. 5. The SEALs breached the second structure. The radio came alive, with sharp calls. Package secure. Repeat. Hostage in hand. Relief caught in her throat. For a heartbeat, she let it wash through her. They'd found him mid-50s, the CIA asset, bruised but alive. She hadn't seen him yet, but the way. Maddox's voice carried, low, steady, controlled, told her it was true. But there was no time to breathe. The earth shook. A second technical roared from behind a collapsed wall, armored this time. Steel plates bolted across its cab. Its gunner swung the mounted 50 toward the SEAL, scrambling with the hostage. The sound was worse than thunder. The ground itself shuddered with each round. Grace's stomach dropped. She swung the Barrett, sight locking on, but the gunner was shielded, only his forearms exposed. The rest of him was hidden behind a wall of crude armor. Her pulse hammered. She had seconds. She adjusted. Breath held. A narrow strip of flesh glowed in her scope. She fired. The bullet ripped through his arm, spinning him from the mount. He collapsed behind the shield, screaming, "Now!" Maddox's voice barked as 2 operators charged forward, hurling a thermobaric grenade under the truck. The blast tore the vehicle apart, steel plates flipping into the air like broken wings. The explosion rolled heat and dust across the compound. Grace threw an arm over her face, ears ringing. When the haze cleared, the technical was a twisted carcass. Silence followed, broken only by coughs, shouts, the scrape of boots against stone. She exhaled a ragged breath. "Doc, status?" Maddox's voice came over coms. Grace wiped grit from her face, pressed the mic. Still breathing. A pause. Then a tone she didn't expect. "You held the line." Her chest tightened. Not long ago, she had been told, "Stay back. Don't fight. Don't let the chaos pull you in." But now, chaos was listening to her. The SEALs regrouped around the hostage, pulling him from the rubble. Connor and the others wounded were being dragged toward the extraction zone. For the first time, Grace allowed herself to believe they might get out. Then it happened. The shot was heavy, hollow, cutting through the noise like a blade. 1 round. 1 thud. She spun. Commander Maddox crumpled into the dirt. It was wrong. Watching him fall, Maddox never fell. He was the one who steadied everyone else. And yet there he was, on his side, coughing, one hand clutching his chest as crimson spread. Beneath him, Maddox down. Someone shouted. Grace's body moved before her mind caught up. She bolted, leaving the Barrett behind for only a second before instinct dragged it with her. She skidded into the dirt beside him, knees slamming stone. Her hands tore open his vest, blood welled high in his chest. Dark, fast, bullet high. She snapped into the mic. Clavicle shattered, possible subclavian bleed. He doesn't have 3 minutes. Her gloves worked furiously. Clotting agent, gauze, hydrogel seal, pressure, pack, press again. Her voice stayed clipped, cold, surgical. But her heart hammered so hard it hurt. Maddox's eyes fluttered open, lips pale, breath shallow. "Doc," he rasped. "Don't talk," she ordered. But he shook his head weakly, the ghost of a smile tugging at his mouth. "Knew you'd hold it together." Her jaw locked as she tightened the seal, pushing harder against the wound. "You sound surprised." "I'm not." His lips cracked in another faint smile. Then his eyes flicked toward the dirt beside him, toward the Barrett. "Give me the rifle." She stared at him. "You're not firing anything." "I'm not asking to shoot," he whispered. "I'm saying you're taking it again." Grace froze. Her gaze fell on the weapon, black and brutal against the sand. Its weight had already bruised her, rattled her to her core. She hadn't asked for it. She hadn't wanted it. And yet, it had saved them. Maddox's hand lifted weakly, trembling as he gestured toward it. "Not an order, a trust. You never left a line," he said. She swallowed hard. Her throat felt raw. Her gloves pressed tighter against his wound, even as her other hand reached, almost against her will, for the Barrett's grip. The radio flared again. Multiple hostiles, Northridge, moving fast. Grace's chest rose and fell in sharp bursts. Her voice cracked into the coms. "Copy. I'm moving to Overwatch." She wasn't ready, God, she wasn't. But the ridge was crawling with fighters, and Maddox was bleeding out at her knees. Her choice wasn't really a choice at all. She dragged the Barrett against her chest, bolted toward the nearest cover, and dropped behind a shattered satellite dish. She pressed her cheek to the stock. Scope hot, dust in her teeth. 5 shapes crested the ridge, fanning out, coordinated, rifles raised. Grace's finger tightened, one shot, one man dropped. Her pulse spiked, another shot, another body collapsed. The rest scattered, ducking behind broken walls. Grace rolled her shoulder against the recoil, teeth clenched, whispering under her breath, "You're not just a medic." She fired again. The third hostile folded mid-sprint. A SEAL nearby glanced over, eyes wide. "You've got to be kidding me. Watch the left." Grace snapped, never pulling her eye from the scope. "I've got the right." And he obeyed instantly. The alley cleared. The immediate threat blunted. But in the back of her mind, one truth echoed with brutal weight. Commander Maddox was still bleeding out behind her, and she was the only thing standing between her team and collapse. How many roles can one person play at once before the weight breaks them? Grace had no time to wonder. The ridge still swarmed. The air shook with bursts of fire, tracers carving lines across the dust-choked compound. Maddox was bleeding out behind her, his life ebbing with every second. The hostage stumbled between 2 operators. Weak but moving, wounded SEALs leaned against one another, limping, half-carried. The battlefield had become a triage unit. Every man either a casualty or about to be, and she was at the center. She pressed her cheek harder to the Barrett stock, scope catching shapes darting between rubble. The rifle roared again, bruising her shoulder, but she didn't flinch. A man dropped, another ducked. Her radio crackled. Webb's voice, sharp. "Doc, keep him off us. We've got Ruiz critical, and Connor fading fast. We need time." Time. That was always her currency. As a medic, she bought time for surgeons, for evac birds, for bodies that weren't ready to quit. But now time meant something else entirely. Her trigger finger was the clock. She rolled her body, repositioning the rifle. eyes narrowing against the scope's glare. Two fighters flanked wide, hoping to circle. She exhaled, fired, adjusted, fired again. Both crumpled into silence. Clear. On the right. She shouted, her voice raw. Dust swirled in the wind, curling around her like smoke. Sweat burned her eyes. Her chest heaved, but she refused to break rhythm. Behind her, Maddox groaned, his voice faint but deliberate. Pressure keep pressure? She risked a glance back. Blood still soaked through the hydrogel patch. His lips were pale, his breath shallow. She crawled the Barrett closer to cover, then dropped to his side, her gloves returning instantly to his wound. Pressure again, her whole body weight pressed. Down. Don't you dare quit on me, she whispered, her voice shaking despite herself. His eyelids fluttered, a ghost of a smile. Not my style. Another burst of fire cracked overhead. She flinched, then swung the rifle back into her arms. She pressed the stock into her shoulder, sighting fast, firing faster. The recoil jolted through her sore muscles, but her eyes stayed sharp. One hostile fell, another fled. The SEAL beside her swore under his breath. Doc's on fire. She didn't feel on fire. She felt split in half. Torn between stabilizing Maddox and holding the ridge, her mind raced with the impossible. Math of seconds. How long could his blood pressure hold? How many more rounds could she land before her aim shook apart? Her hands ached, her shoulders screamed, but the Barrett was steady, almost as if the weapon itself had accepted her. The team surged toward the exfil point, the hostage at their center. Green smoke hissed, curling upward, the signal for the bird. But the enemy wasn't done. A sniper cracked from a distant rooftop, the round tearing stone inches from Grace's face. She dropped flat, heart hammering. Sniper west window. She shouted. The other SEAL sniper, the one who had taken Overwatch earlier, slid beside her. Calm under fire, he nodded once, adjusted his scope, and fired. The hostile dropped lifeless out of sight. He glanced at Grace, his eyes scanning the Barrett in her hands. You good? Her answer was flat. Not done yet. He didn't laugh, didn't question it, just nodded and turned back to the ridge. That small silence spoke louder than words. She had earned her place. Grace crawled back to Maddox, her knees raw against. Broken stone, she checked his pulse. Weak, thready. But there, she flushed plasma through his fore. Hands slick, gloves tearing at the seams, Webb's voice cut through. Bird inbound. 90 seconds. 90 seconds, 90 heartbeats, 90 chances for everything to collapse. Then, movement. She saw it at the compound's edge. A figure sprinting low, an RPG balanced on his shoulder. Her blood ran cold. She swung the Barrett, teeth clenched. Sight locking onto the insurgent just as he leveled the launcher at the extraction zone. Her breath slowed, body stilling in impossible calm. She squeezed. The shot cracked, kicking dust into her face. The insurgent staggered, the RPG veering off wildly before detonating harmlessly in an abandoned wall. The explosion rattled the ground, but no one was hurt. Clear. She screamed, voice hoarse. Webb's reply was instant. You just saved the bird. The Black Hawk descended in a thunder of rotors, wind slicing the smoke into spirals. The team surged toward it, carrying the hostage. Dragging the wounded, Grace stumbled up. Barrett slung across her back, med bag bouncing against her ribs. She grabbed Ruiz with one hand, helping Webb drag him toward the bird. Maddox was last, his body strapped to a stretcher, blood still seeping. Lips pale, Grace pressed 2 fingers to his neck as the crew lifted him aboard. His pulse was faint, still there. Barely, she shoved the Barrett into a crewman's chest. Careful. That thing bites. The crewman gaped at her. You carried this through the whole fight. She didn't answer. She climbed in after it, collapsing onto the metal floor beside Maddox. Her hands immediately went to work. Adjust plasma, check airway, pressure again, stabilize. Her gloves never stopped moving, even as her eyes blurred. With exhaustion, across from her, Webb stared, his face smeared with grime, his voice thick with disbelief. "Where the hell did you learn to shoot like that?" Grace didn't look up. Camp Pendleton instructor said I had a steady eye. I could have gone sniper if I wanted. Webb blinked, shook his head. "So why didn't you?" She tightened the bandage, then finally looked at him. "Because I wanted to save people." The helicopter roared through the sky, the battlefield shrinking beneath them. Maddox groaned, shifting slightly on the stretcher. Grace bent lower, whispering, "You're not dying today. Not on me." His lips moved faintly. 2 words carried through the oxygen mask. "Good work." Her eyes burned. She pressed harder on the bandage, keeping her voice even. "Don't talk. Just breathe." The bird rattled. Engines straining against the desert wind. Around her, the SEALs slumped into silence, each one bleeding, bruised, broken, but alive, and every single one of them stared at Grace differently now. Not as just the medic, but as the one who had held the line. She looked down at her blood-stained hands, the Barrett heavy against her leg, and for the first time admitted the truth to herself. Something had shifted today, something that couldn't be undone. Why was silence always heavier than the firefight? Grace stood at the edge of the medbay, arms folded, eyes locked on the unconscious figure of Commander Maddox. Tubes trailed from his chest. Monitors beeped their cold rhythm. Nurses murmured. In low voices, he looked smaller now, framed by bandages and 4 lines, stripped of the weight he carried in the field. And yet, his presence still filled the room. She hadn't left since the chopper landed. Hours had passed, maybe more. She wasn't even sure. The adrenaline had burned out, leaving her body sore, her shoulder throbbing from the Barrett's recoil. Her gloves still stained even after scrubbing. She should have been resting, but something held her here. Guilt, maybe, or something else she didn't dare name. She had saved him. She had fought for him. But she couldn't shake the feeling that she had crossed a line she could never step back over. "Doc Harlow." The voice came low, gravelly, from behind her. She turned. Master Chief Ellis stood in the doorway, his face unreadable, his posture rigid, sealed to the bone. "You're wanted at debrief." Grace blinked. "Now?" "Commander's orders. Let's move." She glanced once more at Maddox. His chest rose, shallow but steady. Then she nodded, grabbed her notepad, and followed Ellis out. The debrief room was a concrete box, harsh fluorescent light overhead. Folding table in the middle. 6 SEALs were already seated. Webb, Morales, Rook, and the others who'd survived. Their faces were cut, bruised, eyes bloodshot. Every one of them turned when she entered. Something in their gaze had changed. No smirks, no skepticism, no dismissive glances, respect. Grace sat quietly at the end of the table. No one made room. No one needed to. She belonged here now, whether she believed it or not. An officer she didn't recognize entered. Clean uniform, collar stiff, probably from command. He set a folder on the table, flipped it open, and began. Operation Breakpoint. Hostage recovery and asset denial. Status: successful. Casualties: 1 KIA, 3 wounded. Enemy strength: estimated 35. Kill count: 28 confirmed. Hostage recovered. Secondary objective: weapons cache destroyed. He turned the page. Notable incident: Corpsman Harlow engaged enemy combatants using long-range precision fire. Weapon: Barrett M82. Kill count: 7 confirmed. Additional suppressive fire prevented RPG strike on team. Contribution: essential to mission success. The words hung in the air like lead. Grace felt her chest tighten. Her fingers curled into her lap. This was it. Commendation or court-martial? Either way, she was exposed. The officer looked up, expression flat. "Command is re-evaluating your assignment." She blinked. "Sir, you're a Navy corpsman, but you acted far outside your role. That cannot be ignored, good or bad. Webb leaned forward, grime still smeared across his jaw. With respect, sir, she didn't just act outside her role. She saved us all. A murmur of agreement rippled across the table. Morales nodded sharply. Even Rook, usually silent, gave a firm glance her way. The officer held Grace's gaze. So, we've heard, which is why there's a recommendation in progress. One that may move you into TAC program or embedded combat. Support, not just as a medic. Her throat went dry. You're pulling me out of the field? No, we're asking if you want to stay in it, but not as what you were. The words rattled her harder than the Barrett ever had. She looked down at the table. Part of her screamed yes. That part that had lined up the Barrett without hesitation. That had felt alive pulling the trigger, alive in a way she'd never felt in a med tent. But another part, quieter, deeper, remembered the first pulse she ever found under her fingers. The first life she saved with nothing more than gauze and hope. The boy in Fallujah, the old woman in Kandahar, the Marine who bled out in her lap because the bird came too late. She was a medic. But maybe she was something more. Her voice came. Low. I'll consider it. The officer gave a curt nod. That's all we ask. The debrief ended without ceremony. No applause, no backslaps. Just operators gathering their gear. Moving on, but as Grace stood, Webb's hand found her shoulder. You coming to the range tomorrow? She arched a brow. You trying to test me again? He shook his head. Nope. Just want to see if that magic eye of yours works without a war zone. She chuckled softly. I'll be there. That night she walked alone through the compound. The desert heat had finally given way, stars stretching endlessly across the sky. Her boots crunched against gravel, her rifle absent, her medpack heavy against her back. She found herself outside the medbay again. Quiet, dim, Maddox lay inside. Pale, groggy, but alive. When his eyes opened, catching hers across the ward, she froze. You made it. She whispered, his lips tugged faintly, a ghost of a grin. So did you. She stepped closer. Her voice caught, softer now. I didn't mean to take your rifle. I just saw the team needed a shot. His eyes sharpened, even through the haze of pain. That's why I gave it to you. Her breath hitched. You knew? He nodded slowly. I didn't give you that Barrett to save me. I gave it to you because I trusted you. Turns out I was right. Silence hung between them. Heavy, unshakable. Then he added, almost as if it cost him, next time you bring your own rifle. Her throat tightened. She laughed softly, but something inside her shifted because the way he said it. There would be a next time, and she knew it. Why did her hands feel heavier carrying a rifle than they ever had carrying a trauma kit? The sun was just lifting over the Afghan mountains, painting the horizon in pale gold. Shadows stretched long across the dust of the firing range. Grace. Harlow walked forward, boots crunching, medpack slung across her back as always. But in her hand she carried something new, something that wasn't borrowed, wasn't handed off in desperation, her own rifle. A custom-built M110S ASS semi-automatic, lightweight, designed for accuracy and distance. She had signed for it that morning, the quartermaster handing it over without a word. No questions. No ceremony. Just a look that said, word of what you did traveled faster than you think. SEAL Team Griffin was already scattered across the range, their silhouettes sharp against the morning light. Webb, Morales, Rook, all running drills, adjusting. Optics, firing at targets 300 to 900 meters out. The air vibrated with the controlled rhythm of suppressed shots. Casings clattering against dirt. Grace felt their eyes the moment they noticed her. Webb nudged Morales, who stopped mid-reload. Rook straightened from his prone position. Slowly, their chatter faded. The group grew quiet, the kind of silence that always preceded judgment. Grace kept her chin up, her steps steady, pretending not to notice, but she felt it. The weight of their stares, not mocking, not dismissive, measuring. Webb finally broke it. "Nice stick," he said, nodding at the rifle in her hands. Grace let the corner of her mouth twitch. "Shoot straight, at least when the shooter does." A few of them smirked. Rook even gave a short grunt of approval. Morales tilted his head. "You up for a test, Doc?" Her eyes narrowed faintly. "I'm not a doc anymore. Just Grace." Morales grinned. "Grace it is. All right. 3 shots, 1 target, 800 meters. They cleared a lane. A single steel plate, 18 inches wide, gleamed faintly in the distance. Wind drifted low across the range. 4 knots southeast. Grace set the rifle down, unfolded the bipod, and went prone against the dirt. The world seemed to still. She slowed her breathing, let her pulse settle. The chatter, the whispers, the unspoken doubts, they faded. All that remained was her, the rifle, and the plate. The first shot broke like a whisper. The steel rang, dead center. A murmur ran through the group. Grace adjusted her scope. Minute correction, then fired again. Just off-center, her third shot cracked the morning silence. The plate rang true, bullseye. She lowered the rifle, rolled to her side, and met their eyes. Webb gave a smile that needed no words. She'd passed their test. For the first time, she felt it wasn't luck. That afternoon, the command tent called her in. Lieutenant Carr, the XO of the base, sat behind a folding desk stacked with mission files. His uniform was crisp, his tone clipped. He didn't waste time. "You've been requested," he said. Sliding a sealed folder across to her, Grace opened it slowly. The words inside made her throat tighten. Operation Crimson Echo. Deployment classified. Role: Embedded combat medic with secondary sniper authorization. Unit: SEL Team Griffin. Her eyes lifted. "You're sending me back out with them?" Carr nodded. Webb made it clear. "You're part of the team now. Not just a medic, but you can still say no." Her fingers lingered on the folder. She thought of Maddox's voice, pale in the hospital bed, saying, "Next time, you bring your own rifle." A few months ago, she would have walked away. She had dreamed of hospitals, not hideouts, of gauze, not guns, but now the call felt different. "I'm in," she said quietly. The next 72 hours blurred in motion. Equipment checks, weapons drills, field exercises, running both her trauma kit and her rifle side by side. For the first time, she didn't have to choose between being the healer and being the protector. She was both. On the eve of deployment, she sat on a crate outside the tent, the M110 across her lap, cleaning its barrel with deliberate care. Her medkit sat open. Beside her, rolls of gauze stacked neatly, trauma shears gleaming, the tools of her old life and her new one side by side. Webb walked up, a steaming cup of bitter coffee in hand. He dropped onto the crate beside her, handed it over. "You sure about this?" he asked. Grace took a sip, the heat burning her throat. "You weren't?" Webb smirked. "I wasn't sure what you were. Now I know." There was a long pause. Then his eyes softened. "You remind me of Max." Grace frowned. "That's dangerous." "Talk. Max was a medic once too," Webb said, voice quieter. "Before the rifle. Patched more bodies than most surgeons before he picked one up. And when he finally did, he turned the tide of a battle. Just like you." Grace felt something cold settle in her chest. "What happened to him?" Webb looked out across the compound. "He became the best commander we ever had." The weight of lineage pressed against her. She looked down at her hands, the ones that had saved lives, the ones that had pulled a trigger. Both truths lived there now. Webb stood, stretching. "We ship out at 0600. Don't forget the coffee." Grace chuckled softly as he walked away. When dawn came, she boarded the C-130 with Team Griffin, her rifle slung beside her medpack, her seat between Morales and Rook. No one questioned it. No one joked. She was one of them now. Not by uniform, by fire. The bird lifted, engines rattling through her bones. Grace closed her eyes against the vibration. She wasn't sure what lay ahead. All she knew was this: she wasn't going into the next fight as just a medic. She was going in as Grace, and whatever came next, she was ready to carry both burdens. How do you carry two callings into the same battle without breaking? The valley stretched below them, jagged ridges casting long shadows as the convoy rolled in under cover of night. Operation Crimson Echo was supposed to be simple raid A. Weapons facility, extract intelligence, destroy the rest. On paper, it was nothing extraordinary, but Grace knew better than to believe in clean missions. She adjusted the strap on her med pack, the weight familiar. Across her chest hung her 110. Its suppressor already fitted, its optics glinting faintly in starlight. One strap cut into her shoulder. The other bruised her ribs. 2 lives she carried. The one sworn to save. The one forced to take, inside the MRAP. The team rode silent. Webb sat across from her, helmet tipped low. Morales cleaned his sidearm with methodical strokes. Rook leaned against the wall, eyes closed but not asleep. They didn't need to speak. The hum of the engine, the rattle of gear, the shared air between them, it was enough. Grace stared at the dust mote swirling in the red glow of the cabin lights. Her chest was tight, not with fear, but with anticipation. Would she freeze? Would she miss? Would she fail one roll by trying to hold both? The convoy halted. The rear door dropped. Night rushed in like a cold tide. They spilled out. Boots hitting sand. The facility loomed in the distance. Half-buried bunkers, steel containers, crude towers strewn with wires. Faint light glowed from narrow slits in the walls. "Dock, up high," Webb whispered, motioning toward an outcropping. "Overwatch until breach. Then you follow," Grace nodded, sliding the rifle off her shoulder. She crawled into position against the rocks, scope adjusting. The crosshairs steadied on the first tower. Alone. Guard leaned lazily against the railing, cigarette burning orange in the dark. Her breath slowed, her fingers squeezed. The rifle whispered. The guard slumped, her stomach twisted. Different from the Barrett. Quieter, sharper, but still the same weight. "Tower clear," she murmured. The team moved in like shadows. She tracked them through her scope, eyes sweeping the compound. More guards shifted at the perimeter. She dropped another, then another. Her shots weren't dramatic. They were surgical, quiet incisions into the night. Then the breach began. Explosives cracked the silence. The team poured inside, shouts muffled by suppressed gunfire. Grace stayed high, eyes cutting through the darkness, watching for movement, and then it came. 2 hostiles burst from the far side of the compound, one with an AK, the other dragging an RPG. Her blood froze. "To south wall, RPG." She hissed into the mic. She fired before the words were out. The first man fell. The second swung the launcher upward. Too fast. Her finger tightened. The shot cracked. He collapsed, the tube clattering harmlessly to the dirt. "Clear." Webb's voice came. Grace exhaled, only then realizing her chest had locked tight. Minutes stretched. The team moved deeper, muffled explosions marking each detonation inside. Grace scanned, restless, pulse refusing to settle. The silence between bursts was worse than the noise. Then, the cum spiked with panic. Rook down. I repeat, Rook hit. Her body jolted. Without thinking, she abandoned the overwatch and sprinted down the ridge. Rocks tore at her knees. Dust burned her throat, but none of it mattered. She crashed into the compound, just as Webb and Morales dragged Rook behind cover. Blood streamed from his thigh, dark and heavy. Grace dropped beside him. Medpack open in a flash. Gauze. Tourniquet. Pressure. Her gloves soaked instantly, sticky heat running across her palms. "Stay with me," she muttered. Voice low, steady. Rook groaned, teeth clenched, eyes wild with pain. Webb fired blindly over the wall, shouting, "We've got contact east." Grace's world split again, hands sealing a wound, ears catching. The rattle of gunfire. Eyes flicking to her rifle lying against the wall. "Morales!" she barked. "Keep pressure here." She slid the tourniquet tight, shoved Morales' hands down on the gauze, then snatched the M110, pressed her cheek to the stock. Shapes flickered at the east wall. Muzzle flashes spitting. She lined up, squeezed. One dropped. She shifted, fired again. Another fell. Webb's voice cracked through. "That's it. Push." The SEALs surged, clearing the last of the defenders. The compound fell into uneasy quiet. Grace lowered the rifle, chest heaving. Her hands shook, not from the shots, from the knowledge that one heartbeat too long and Rook would have bled out. She dropped back beside him. His skin was pale, but his pulse was still there. Stronger now. "You're not dying today," she whispered, echoing words she'd once said to Maddox. Rook's lips cracked into a faint grin. "Guess I owe you a drink?" She smiled weakly, sealing the bandage. "Start with 2. When extraction arrived, the facility behind them burning, Grace sat in the bird with Rook's head against her lap, the rifle across her knees. She didn't even notice the blood staining her uniform. All she felt was the strange, heavy truth pressing into her chest. She had saved him because she was a medic. She had protected him because she was a sniper, and she could never be just one again. Why was it always harder to face the quiet than the gunfire? 2 weeks after Operation Crimson Echo, Grace stood outside the hospital tent, boots sunk in dust, rifle slung across her shoulder. She hadn't gone inside yet, not since they'd landed. She had spent her days between the range and the medbay, tending to Rook's recovery, running drills, trying to pretend that the shifting weight in her chest wasn't changing her. But Maddox was awake now, and she couldn't avoid him forever. She drew a breath, pushed the flap aside, and stepped in. The room smelled of antiseptic and sweat. Machines hummed softly. Maddox lay propped up on a cot, skin pale, but eyes sharp as ever. The moment he saw her, a smile tugged faintly at his mouth. "You finally..." "Show." Grace swallowed, her voice steadier than she felt. "Didn't want to interrupt your beauty sleep." His laugh cracked into a cough. He waved her closer, his hands still wrapped in tape. She stepped forward. The sound of her boots sharpened the small space. "You ran the Barrett like it was yours," he said. "It wasn't," she replied. "No," he agreed, eyes narrowing. "Slightly, it wasn't, but now it is." She frowned, confused. He nodded toward the wall. Against it leaned her new M110, polished, ready. "They told me," Maddox said, voice low, deliberate. "What you did at Crimson Echo, they wanted. To know if I thought you'd gone rogue." Her stomach clenched. "And what did you tell them?" His eyes locked on hers, unwavering. "I told them you did exactly what I would have done." Grace felt her throat tighten. She turned her head slightly, trying to steady the storm behind her ribs. "You're not just a medic anymore, Grace," Maddox said. "And you know it?" Silence stretched. Heavy. Finally, she whispered, "I don't know what I am anymore." His smile was faint but steady. "You're exactly what the team needs." The words settled into her like stone. Not a medal, not a commendation, just trust. And maybe that meant more than either. Days bled into weeks. Grace moved between roles as naturally as breathing. In the mornings, she patched wounds, checked vitals, stocked supplies. In the afternoons, she laid prone on the range, sighting steel plates, refining her rhythm. The SEALs no longer teased. They no longer called her Doc with that tone of distance. They called her Grace. One night, after a long day of drills, she sat outside under a desert sky, stars spilling across the black like salt. Webb dropped beside her, offering a canteen. "You ever think about what's next?" he asked. Grace sipped, the water sharp against her dry throat. "Every day." "And?" She let out a quiet breath. "I came here to save lives. That was the only thing I thought I'd ever be. But when Maddox went down, when the team was pinned, I realized saving lives doesn't always mean bandages. Webb nodded slowly. Sometimes it means a bullet. She looked at him, eyes steady. Does that make me less of what I was? He shook his head. Makes you more. They sat in silence after that, the night heavy but not unfriendly. When Maddox finally walked back into the team's ready room, his arms still bound in a sling. No one said a word at first. They just stared. Then, one by one, the SEALs rose, Webb first, Morales next. Until they all stood in quiet respect, Maddox's gaze found Grace. Report, he said simply. She stood straighter, the words coming naturally. Med supplies stocked, range drills complete. Rook stable for light ops, ready when you are, Commander. For a moment, no one breathed. Then Maddox gave the faintest nod. Good work. The 2 words were enough. That night, Grace lay awake in her bunk, staring at the canvas ceiling. She thought about the girl she'd been when she arrived in Afghanistan, the one who carried nothing but gauze and determination, the one who thought her worth was measured only in heartbeats saved. And she thought about the woman she was now, one who had steadied a rifle in the middle of chaos, who had pulled a commander back from the edge, who had carried 2 truths at once and hadn't shattered. Both women lived inside her still. Maybe they always would. She closed her eyes, the desert wind rattling the canvas overhead. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. Sometimes it doesn't ask permission. Sometimes it simply acts, and in that silence, Grace finally understood. She was never just a medic. She was Grace Harlow, and she was enough.